welcome to everyone that's already joined here this morning for our talk on, empowering communities to compost. We have Domingo Morales with us and Nigel Deacon of metroSTOR. I'm here as well. My name is Tim Steckel, and yeah, I'm really happy to talk about this. Organic waste drop-off stations are one of my favorite things, if that makes sense. Yeah, and we've got a few stories to share, some numbers, some data that we want to share with you guys, and let's get started. Well, we're gonna have a little bit of a small presentation. There's going to be a conversation, and there's also an opportunity for you guys to ask your questions. So that's kind of the process of this meeting today. So yeah, let's dive right in and talk about how we can make compost happen, how we can collect clean organic waste, source separate it, and yeah. So I guess most people in this room today are from our regular trash. There's way too much of organic waste in our regular trash, and it just doesn't belong there. It shouldn't end up in the landfill, and it's creating tons of problems that we need to deal with. And collecting those organics properly is really the starting point of the whole process. So that's why we need to get it right. Currently, only 12% of all the US households even have access to a food waste service. And we need to boot up the composting infrastructure, the organic waste infrastructure as a whole. We need to not just collect the material, but we also need to have a way to, to transport it somewhere. And that's another component. But today we really want to look at the first part of that equation, and that is collecting those. Yeah, we have a lot of issues to overcome to actually make it happen. And right now, landfilling in a lot of spaces is still more cost effective, cheaper really to do. But it's something that we're dealing with, and yeah, it's we need to make it convenient. We need to make it happen, and then we need the infrastructure in place. So collecting the organics is one thing. We need to make sure it's clean, it's not contaminated with plastics or other non-compostable materials, and that really starts at everyone's household. And that is one of the things that I like about these organic drop-off stations that we're going to talk about today, is really that they're not just infrastructure to collect these materials, but they're also a touch point for education, for awareness around what can go into these bins, what can we actually collect. And yeah, it's for a lot of people, it's really a new habit that they need to create, and that takes time. And so we need to constantly remind them of what can go in and what can't. I want to share a little bit about a program out of Ohio. I'm based in Ohio, and we have SWACO, which is the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, and they have created a food waste drop-off program in the last few years, which has been pretty successful. The landfill, the Franklin County landfill, receives almost 1 million pounds of organic waste every day currently, and they have been slowly booting up this program and have been collecting about 1 million pounds. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but there's still a lot of room for us to collect more. But it's a slow process, it's a phased process, and these drop-off stations are one of the easiest way to get it started. So what's obvious is that the having drop-off stations is much easier than getting the curbside right away. As I mentioned, they're educational touch points, and once a community has these drop-off stations established, then it's also a much easier path towards a curbside collection because you can start to collect data. You can see that you're actually taking a portion out of, from that, the general or the whole mass of solid waste, reduces little by little as, the more we divert. So what we've learned from this program is that you should name it intentionally, and that is a lot of these, we're calling them organic waste drop-off stations, but there's also some communities where they call it, or they label it compost, and it's not compost yet. So be intentional about how you label your bins, how you call your program, and then if you have a community where you're rolling this out in different neighborhoods and more areas, then also stay consistent. You just take a look at your map and see where there is existing infrastructure, where you could maybe place those drop-off stations. So, for example, there are some areas where there's already paper being recycled and collected. So that's an area where you could place your containers or your receptacles. Then those commuter routes where there's a main road where people pass by every day. Again, we want to make it convenient. Yeah. Another thing is that most of the successful programs require some sort of registration, and that is twofold. If you register the participants, then you know about your numbers, so you know how many people are actually participating in the program, but it also reduces the contamination. And yeah, so what they also learned is that when you're rolling out these programs, what can be helpful is to provide residents with compostable liners. That obviously depends on whether or not your composting facility can process those, but it makes the collection process more convenient, a little bit cleaner, and that helps. What they've also been looking into is opportunities for sponsorships. These drop-off stations have surface area, real estate, so to speak, where you can include local businesses or sponsors, and they can be helpful with funding this whole process. So, well, I think that was a little bit too early. So yeah, if you are looking for some sort of template or guidance in how to create a drop-off program in your community and your municipality, I would highly recommend to look into the SWACO Save More Than Food campaign. They have different resources, how to label your bins. There are also numbers, case studies that you can use if you want to present them to your city council or other deciders. Then you're not starting from scratch. You have actual hard evidence, and yeah, you can find that by checking out or Googling Save More Than Food, and then also you can reach out to SWACO directly. Jane Boom has been really instrumental in setting up this program. She's a member of the Ohio Organics Council. That's how I know her, and I know she would be happy to help you out in getting these resources. So yeah, definitely look out for the SWACO program, and I think I'm going to hand this over now to Domingo, who's going to talk a little bit about what he's doing in New York.
Thank you, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. Good morning. So everyone, just to give you some background, my name is Domingo Morales. I am the founder and CEO of Compost Power. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I grew up in New York City, mostly in the public housing system. So I grew up in public housing, and growing up in those situations, in those areas, I realized that there wasn't much sustainability in the design in these campuses. And growing up, I could care less about sustainability because I was in public housing and we were more focused on making sure there was food in the fridge, making sure everyone went to school. So sustainability, trash, composting, it just wasn't something we were taught as kids. And I really didn't learn about composting until I joined an AmeriCorps program in 2020. So in 2015. So yeah, from 2015, I learned about community composting through Green City Force, which is an AmeriCorps program. And Green City Force basically teaches young adults who live in public housing how to farm, how to compost, how to work with solar panels. They basically introduce young adults into the green economy. So that was my introduction to the world of farming. A little bit of background for everyone in the chat. I was a germaphobe before joining Green City Force. And I thought that germs could kill me. I couldn't share cups with my brothers and sisters. I was real bad. Like I was afraid of germs. So when I learned about this AmeriCorps program and they taught me about sustainability and they introduced me to the idea, I was excited to get into the energy sector. I was really excited to do solar panels. I lived for the thrill. I wanted to hang from roofs. This is kind of what I wanted to do. And there was two different programs in AmeriCorps at that time with Green City Force. One was the farm team and one was the energy team. And I was hell bent on joining the energy team because that's what my expertise were in. But they forced me to join the farm team because they said it was a longer program and my resumes would really serve the farm. And I really didn't understand how knowing building maintenance, plumbing, and electrical can help on a farm until I went to the Red Hook composting site and I was introduced to David Buckle. And the Red Hook composting site at the time was the largest compost site in the United States that didn't use any fossil fuels. But when I went, I was really concerned about the germs. I was concerned about dying on this composting site. But then I quickly learned that my mentor, my soon-to-be mentor, David Buckle, was also a germaphobe, and he was teaching me ways to like work with compost to like cover up your hands, cover up your face. But after a couple months of actually learning the science behind composting and learning how we're actually generating microbes that are beneficial for our health, it kind of changed the way I looked at germs. And that's when I became focused on creating really good compost because if you make really good compost, really healthy compost, it actually makes your immune system stronger and it doesn't make you sick. It can't kill you. So once I learned that, I'm like, all right, I need to learn how to farm the right microbes, the good guys, the ones that are on my side. And I started at the Red Hook composting site from 2015 to 2020. And it was amazing working there because we had 2,000 volunteers a year. We had 200 tons that we were processing. We would go staff these food scrap drop-offs. And we had this amazing site where we were still training the young adults that came through AmeriCorps after me. And that was really cool. But in 2020, I think the city decided that because of the pandemic, they had to cut all of the funding for community composting. And my job was eliminated, which was working at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, running the Red Hook composting site. And a lot of community composters lost their jobs. And community composting was kind of halted throughout the pandemic. And for me, that was a depressing moment in time. I needed to be out there with people. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life again. So for me, I had to figure it out, and it took some soul searching to realize that I just missed people. So I went out to one of the Green City Forest Farms, the AmeriCorps program I trained with, and I volunteered with the core members, and I realized that the compost system needed some love, time, and attention. So I asked them if I could rebuild that compost system, um, and and they let me rebuild it. So it was the first three bin system that I built in Canarsie in 2020. This is during the pandemic. No one was really outside, but we were working with core members because even though most people were, forced to stay home when it comes to service, when it comes to the front line, my community was still out there working, whether they were on a farm, whether they were working at restaurants, they were still out there working. So it was really cool to see that Green City Force was still able to keep some of their programming throughout the pandemic. And I found the home. I found the place where I'm like, all right, there's people here, like there's other people. So I connected with Green City Force, and after we built that first site, I used it as proof of concept to the David Prize, which is a prize in New York. is $200,000 a year for $200,000 every year for 5 New Yorkers that they give away. And I was one of the first winners. And my idea was to bring composting to public housing. In the beginning, my idea was to build a compost gym. That was before the pandemic. I wanted to use pulleys connected to shovels to create kinetic energy and potential energy by composting. And I was going to call it motion with meaning. So none of the energy in the gym is wasted. But then 2020 happened and I realized like the gym wasn't necessary. We actually just need more composting in New York City. So I just decided to build compost sites in public housing. And sent that proof of concept to the David Prize. And a couple months later, I won. And that's how Compost Power was born. And Compost Power's mission is to to provide access to all New Yorkers with composting, education, and access with an emphasis on the public housing community in New York City. Public housing, I think right now we're at 225 campuses throughout New York City. One of the largest landowners in New York is public housing. 1 in 17 New Yorkers live in public housing, but public housing doesn't have a robust composting program. Public housing is still catching up to the regular recycling of, paper, metal, plastic. So the composting wasn't really there. So my idea was to just bring composting to public housing, because if we can't figure out the waste situation in public housing, New York City is never going to be a zero waste city. If we don't focus on public housing and these dense communities, these urban communities, we're never going to get to zero waste in any city. So for me, public housing was the first step, and that's where we started. Awesome. So at our sites, we have a few different systems that we use. We use 3-bin systems, which is a wooden system with steel screen wrapped around it. We also use windrow systems, which are those pyramid-shaped mounds. And then we have a few tumblers. But at these compost sites throughout the city, we have 9 compost sites throughout the city now, 8 of them in public housing campuses. What we found was in the beginning, we had food scrap drop-offs. And a food scrap drop-off was just basically a staffed food scrap drop-off. Residents had a specific time period throughout the day where we were there and they were allowed to bring their food scraps. And if anyone lives in dense communities and urban environments, you understand that not everyone has the same work schedule, right? In New York City, they say it's a city that never sleeps. And the reason they say that is because you have people working night shift, people working day shift. You have people that kind of work whenever the work is called to them. Whenever they're called, they have to go to work. And in NYCHA, a lot of these frontline workers have those crazy schedules. So there's no set schedule that every public housing residents can follow. There's no way every resident is going to have access to your staffed food scrap drop-off. And we learned that early on. There was a lot of criticism, a lot of critique. How are you guys expecting us to recycle, bring food scraps to this spot when we come, you're not there because you left already? Or I have to leave for work at 7 in the morning. You guys don't get there till 8 in the morning. So what do I do? So we had some residents dropping food scraps on the ground, which is not good because that could feed rats. You had some residents that would just take it to the nearest trash can and throw it out. And the trash cans in New York are not covered up, not closed, not enclosed. So that also is going to feed rats and it's going to create odors in the community. So these are some of the issues we figured out early on that we had to address and we had to correct. So that's why we started doing 24/7 food scrap drop-offs. And the 24/7 food scrap drop-off was tricky in the beginning because we had some residents dropping regular recycling in our toters. It was just an open toter on certain spots on the campus where residents can drop off, but we got more trash than food scraps. And for us, that was an issue. It's like you set up a food scrap drop-off to increase access. You increased access, but a little too much access because now it looks like a perfect place to put trash. So that was an issue that we always faced, and it was in the back of our mind. It takes a lot more human power to decontaminate these toters. It takes a lot more human power to staff these food scrap drop-offs to make sure we're getting the right material. So we really didn't know what we were going to do. We were looking at the big bellies that the Department of Sanitation was using, but it wasn't big enough. It had a smart bin, like a smart app enabled, just like the metroSTOR bin, but there's a lot of residents in public housing who don't have access to smartphones. So for us, that bin just was never an option because we're not going to get something that only some of our residents can access. So we just stuck it out with the regular toters and a gorilla strap. And the gorilla strap kind of reduced contamination because it's an extra step to get into these toters. And then we went to a trade show where we stumbled upon these metroSTOR bins. And I was like really excited to see these metroSTOR bins because they had a keypad on it where you could actually put your PIN code. You don't need a smartphone. And I was excited about that. On top of that, it had like 3 times the capacity of the big belly machines. You could fit a 64-gallon toter. And if you wanted, you could go up to a 94-gallon. So for me, I'm like, oh, this is good. For a big NYCHA building, I need at least a 64-gallon toter, and I need to empty that a few times a week. So we purchased the metroSTOR bin just to test it out, just to see, does this work? Does this even make sense? So the food scrap drop-offs in New York City, the challenges were, I hope we're on that slide, the food scrap drop-off with challenges. It's a brown bin and a Compost Power logo next to it. The challenges were 300 to 500 families per week. We had the high levels of contamination. Totas can tip over and they require a chain and a lock. You'd be surprised in New York City how many toters walk away from food scrap drop-offs when they're not chained to a fence. There have been times when we walked up a couple blocks and one of the neighbors was actually using it for trash. They were just using it as their trash. So we just replaced it, put signage on it, and started locking them to gates. So these are the things that toters need. And then on top of that, toters don't really increase curb appeal. As you see these toters on the gate, they don't look bad, but we have to be there every day just to make sure these toters are not overfilling, making sure they're not tipping over in the wind. We have to move that pallet that's under the toters because if you put a toter on grass or on dirt, then a rat is going to burrow underneath that toter and just wait for residents to drop scraps on the ground, and they're going to eat it and burrow underneath. So we started putting our toters on pallets, and then we have to move that location about 5 feet at least once a month just to make sure it doesn't create a habitat. These are some of the issues we were finding. And once we got to the metroSTOR bin, we started to notice the benefits of installing this metroSTOR bin. Next slide, if you're not on that one yet. The metroSTOR bin, as I said earlier, is keypad enabled. They're rodent proof, and I've been using these for almost a year now. I can honestly say they're rodent proof. The rodents aren't getting underneath it. They aren't getting in the bin. They aren't climbing in from the top. These are 100% rodent proof. Assuming someone isn't putting something to break, like degrade your metal, someone is intentionally trying to sabotage your bin. They're fixed to the ground. So I even tried to, once I fixed it to the ground with 4-inch Tapcon screws into concrete, I like nudged it with my car and it doesn't move. So the wind is not going to move it. Kids are not going to jump on it. It's not a safety hazard for the city. And then if you notice that it does have this lever that you kick on the bottom that opens the bin, you can put like a rubber attachment over that if you're worried about kids using scooters on the sidewalk. But what we did was we just put a yellow paint on the ground, and we noticed that the kids kind of go around it and they slow down when they see the bin anyway, because we put the Pac-Man game on the side of it. So kids really love it. Residents feel special when they get access to these bins. A lot of residents, once they get it, they feel like they're in some kind of secret society, and they actually protect the bins. And this is really cool when you see that if someone's putting regular trash in or trying to like force it open. I've had other residents saying like, hey, that's a compost bin. Leave that alone. Like, go to the trash bin. That's not a trash bin. And that really helps. We saw an increase in participation by 20% at our site. And that's literally people stepping up and saying, hey, what is this? How can I use this bin? There were people that weren't interested in coming throughout the food scrap drop-off because they're a little shy and they don't like interacting with other people. And those customers, those people just came and asked, hey, can I get this pin? Like, can I get the code to this so I can drop off at night? And those residents drop off. And we also noticed 60% reduction in contamination. And the contamination that we lost by installing this metroSTOR bin was the plastic bottles, metal, paper, regular trash. The only reason why it's 60% and not 100% is because there's contamination that we miss in the household. And I think that's a bigger training point for everyone who's composting in urban cities is like the fruit stickers, the twist ties, the little rubber bands that come on the broccoli. These are things that residents kind of miss. Over time, residents get better because we kind of point those out, and we do exhibits sometimes where if there's something that's being put into your bin system that you don't accept, but you're seeing a lot of it, you can create an exhibit like a sign next to your food scrap drop off that has all of the things you don't accept, and it kind of sends a message to people, hey, this is slowing us down. This is reducing the quality of our compost, and you'll see the contamination go down with that. So we also realized that the toter is not built to do this, but we have had a toter that was about 350 pounds come out of that thing because it was a holiday week and we were gone for a couple extra days. We didn't empty it when we should have. And it was like 350 pounds in that toter. It was easy to wheel out, but I would suggest not letting it get that full. If the toter gets, I would say like 75% full, you might want to empty that just to make space for more residents to come behind them. And metroSTOR actually does come with a sensor if you wanted it to tell you when it's time to empty that bin so you don't get, too much weight in those toters. Another thing is it's easy to empty and clean. Because the opening on the top is so big, the food scrap goes straight into the toter, but the toter is a little bigger, so it doesn't fall to the sides. If something does fall to the side, you can pull the toter out and just rinse it down with a hose, as long as you don't touch, the electrical wires. But that stuff's all sealed up. We actually did rinse it because as we were installing it, we got it muddy, and it worked out. Nothing was damaged. So you can rinse these out really easily without any worries. And then at the end, I would say updates. After I think the first 4 months of using this at our Williamsburg location, we saw contamination was reduced by 85%. Little to no contamination, just the fruit stickers, twist ties, which we can get out because we process by hand. Another update is New York City Housing Authority is planning to install more of these smart bins thanks to the demonstration. And this is really important. I think a lot of people assume that public housing isn't invested in sustainability. And I think there's proof working with public housing, working with CBOs, community partners, that public housing is constantly trying to innovate, constantly trying to organize the waste and make their campuses more sustainable. What we don't have public housing is the funding to back it up. So that's one thing that we're kind of it's slowing down the implementation of these smart bins citywide, is there's not much funding for these kind of programs. And I think I want to use this platform as like anyone out there that knows about infrastructure funding to kind of share it with the resources with the communities in this call so we can get more of these in the city. These bins don't only reduce contamination and reduce rodents, but they reduce labor costs. So we had one young adult who was traveling from a really far part of the city coming in, and sometimes the trains in New York just don't agree with us, and they'll just stop moving, and no one knows when the train's going to start moving. So there were times when we had the staff food scrap drop off when our staffers came late because of circumstances they couldn't control. And that, made us start making them come a little earlier. Like, hey, come 30 minutes early. I'll pay you for 30 minutes extra just to give them that time. So with these smart bins, if someone's late to a staff food scrap drop off, that's okay because the residents still have a place to put it. And at the sites that we do have the smart bins, we still have our staffed hours. And if it's staffed and we're there, we ask people to put it into the bins that are out and in the open. But when we're not there, those residents don't feel like they have to throw it away because we're not there, because they have this metroSTOR bin now. So that reduced a lot of labor. It created ease of mind. The staff didn't feel too pressured or guilty for coming late and missing someone who dropped off their food scraps. So I think this is something we should be doing, because once you create a food scrap drop off in the city, and I've seen Department of Sanitation actually use the same model and it works. They would staff a food scrap drop off for years, and then the food scrap drop off would disappear and a smart bin would show up, and all of those residents would be using those smart bins. They have one in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn, where it used to be a really large food scrap drop off. They removed it, and I drove past the other day, and there's a smart bin there. And some of the same people that used to drop off their scraps to me when I staffed that food scrap drop off are now using the smart bin. So I think food scrap drop offs are a great way to get people knowing, right? Staff food scrap drop offs, getting them to know. But something like this that you put on the corner makes a statement that the city is about composting. When you see infrastructure in public housing for recycling and for composting, it says New York City public housing is all for recycling and sustainability. And I think that's what we need to see in the city. We need to see more entities, more governmental agencies saying this is what we stand for. If everyone in the world decided to recycle all of their food waste and we decided to process our food waste in a sustainable way, we can slow down climate change by 30%. And that's even bigger than if we were to swap all of our gas cars with electric cars tomorrow. I think food scraps is the easiest way for the world to become more sustainable. And I'll leave it at that.
Great points, Domingo. That's really, really inspiring to what you're achieving there, partnership with Nigel. And I completely agree with you that starting to reduce the food waste going into landfill is one of the biggest wins out there in terms of reducing our emissions. So I've just got a few bits. First of all, the role of drop-offs from a municipal point of view. If you compare, if you like, the two common methods of collection, you've got curbside and drop-off. I think curbside, look, it's you're definitely going to get more material diverted overall because more people have got access to it. It's more convenient for them. What you don't have is much control over contamination. And the thing that we're hearing a lot from cities is we just can't commit the funds to actually set up a curbside program. It's $1 million. It's this, it's that, and when it comes to areas like the public authority housing, other densely developed areas, curbside's quite limited, curbside collection. So drop-off's got a part to play, whether you already have curbside or indeed whether you don't. Very low cost to set up and can be scaled up as required. The people that want to want to separate the food scraps, deposit them, the people that really want to do it, you can start to serve that part of your population. If you do it right, with the right equipment, you've certainly got the ability to control contaminations we've been hearing, and works really well in communal applications like multifamily downtown areas. So maybe a lower diversion rate, at least for a start overall, but what you do get will be very clean. And I think pretty much everybody here will say we'd rather have a bit less, but have clean material that we can actually compost than have lots of material which is contaminated and still ends up going back to the landfill. So that's a sort of comparison between the two methods, if you like. One example is with the town of Manchester in Connecticut. I've been working with for about a year, and they selected drop-off because of its value in terms of educating the local population, inspiring them, and making it accessible to their communities. They chose a method which required the residents to register so that they've got some control over the contamination, and obviously the 24/7 access has been really, really valuable for them. And we look forward to another event in the next month or two when they'll be joining and telling us a bit more about how they're getting on. I have put a link there to a podcast that we did with Rachel when she was working in Manchester a few months ago. So I don't know if you can get it from the slides, but we can certainly drop that in the chat later. So there's certainly growing amount of experience around running projects like this. Of course, what we're really trying to do is change behaviour. And there's three key things around behaviour change in this environment: knowledge, motivation, and ease. So knowledge is a lot about getting how we communicate, both why it's important that we do this, but exactly how we want people to go about doing that. Motivation, I think, is equally important. Humans were very selfish, so giving people something which actually they see as a benefit to them, whether it's cleaner buildings, cleaner environment, some forms of incentivization we're looking at, but of course just make it fun. I mean, this is a great example from the units that are currently being installed in DC. Some great graphics, real fun project to be working on. But crucially, we need an infrastructure that makes it easy for people to do the right thing. So they're not going to make additional effort. And it works right from the kitchen right through to where they deposit that, its final, resting place, as it were. So making sure they've got caddies, liners, and accessible deposit points, they're the real keys to getting a successful drop-off program going. Pretty basic stuff. It's an example from London, UK, that we were involved with a few years ago, where they worked in across some public authority housing, about 500 apartments, and they located drop-off points outside each building. They used some very interesting what they call disruptive graphics. So it's things that stop people in their normal habits and go, right, I need to do something different. And I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. The motivation for them was that they were getting cleaner buildings, less odour, and obviously control of the vermin and so forth that relate to food waste somewhat inevitably. As an outcome, and this was from detailed waste composition analysis, they found that the organics in the trash reduced by 45%, so massive reduction. And on average, they were getting £2 or £3 per household per week across, say, 500 apartments. So there's some, and again, I'll give you a link later to their detailed report, which might have some things which will cross over to your circumstances. Here's some examples of the way they communicated that. Again, I can give you a link to lots of things to download. Another project, Fife Council in Scotland, they did a project last year on high-rise buildings, and they followed the same principle. They made it easy for people to deposit material just outside the building. They made sure they got caddies. They made sure they got liners. They used a similar form of communication. The motivation again was that the building didn't smell of decomposing, organic material anymore. And actually, lots of people really do want to do this. They are committed to waste diversion, but only if we make it easy enough. And they were getting, over £100 of organics per building per week, and I'll give you a link to that. Some of the communications I think quite interesting. When in Europe we use a lot of AD, as you probably know. So they were saying things like, look, it powers your communal heat network, and various other things, but finding things which actually resonate with them in terms of benefit. Stickers on the caddies, feedback on how well each building was doing, and relating it back to something which they could relate to. 1 tonne is 20 bags of coal. Maybe there's something about Scotland. I don't know. I don't really know what a bag of coal looks like, but they obviously did. So that's again, I'll give you some more links to things like that. And so I suppose the underlying message here really is, look, any community, anywhere, we can actually empower them to make a difference when it comes to capturing food scraps from the waste stream and actually putting them to good use and stopping those harmful emissions, causing so much damage. So that's really what I wanted to share, just to sum up. So we're really into a bit of a Q&A. Tim, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks Domingo for sharing your story, and Nigel chiming in on this. I think Domingo has really an inspirational journey behind him, and a lot more work in front of him too. So you know, I think one thing becomes clear, and that is composting and organics recycling is a lot about context, and we need to meet people where they are. We need to consider their behaviors, their living circumstances. We've seen, it's a whole different ballgame when we're in a housing project where there's a dense population compared to what I was talking about earlier in Ohio, where it's like kind of rural or like smaller towns. But the basic thing is that we all eat, so we all have food waste that we need to collect. And as we're kind of like starting this Q&A, I would like to invite you guys to put your questions in the chat. If you have any sort of like specific question for Domingo or Nigel or me, any sort of challenge that you're facing in your community, let us know. Maybe we can connect you with someone. Maybe we can point you towards a resource. And kind of cut your path short towards starting an organic waste collection in your community. So yeah, I will be monitoring the chat, and Nigel, I kind of like give it back to you to just kind of kick this off, our little conversation at the end here.
Yeah, sure. So we've got a few questions in the chat there, and one from Nick is, Domingo, how can your journey from germophobe to composter be applied to getting the general public to get past the yuck factor of food scrap collection and composting?
One thing I will say is they call me the Gordon Ramsay of community composting. Our compost is very clean, and I have a zero tolerance for odors, rats, or any anaerobic condition. So I am very meticulous with the composting method. We are actually one of the only community composters in the city that could break down meat, dairy, bone in 3 weeks. And that's because we have a really good process, and we like to call them heirloom microbes. We don't lose any of the finished compost at the end of the process. 25% of the finished compost goes right back into the beginning of the process. So I don't like smelly sites. I don't like sites that have rats. And that's why we've created something called the rodent reduction rubric that actually, if people follow this rubric, they can use it to build a compost site without odors and without rodent issues. So that's how I got over it. The site needs to be really clean. There are some sites that trigger my germophobia still.
Yeah. We got another question, and someone was asking if there's a difference between the green and the brown toters, Domingo, or is this the same?
It's the same. So the brown toter is, before we were here, this community garden had the curbside program where Department of Sanitation would allow the gardeners to put their garden waste in this toter, and then they'll pick it up once a week. So this garden was already in that program before Compost Power even came to the site. And then in 2020, they just abandoned them. So this is the gardener in this site is actually one of my staff members now, but he's a guerrilla gardener. He just jumped over the fence. It was an abandoned garden, and he said, I'm gonna take this over, and started using this brown bin that DSNY was giving him. But when they abandoned him, I told him, don't worry, we'll process it on site. So we continued using that brown bin, and the brown bin was too small. So this just shows the journey in Wagner houses. The brown bin was way too small for the residents, so we got a bigger bin. And then when we got that bigger bin, so all 3 of those bins at this site, Wagner, which is, I think, it gives every other site a run for their money. But the Wagner site, all 3 of these bins are still used. Like, there are seniors who really love the brown bin because it's really short on the ground. The black bin, some people just like the cool strap, like the motion of flapping the strap back, they like it. And then the smart bin is there when we open this vent, so residents are going to be able to use that. So this just shows you the journey. We started out in 2020 with that small brown bin, and now that small brown bin is not enough. If we get rid of the brown bin for some reason, there's some residents that freak out. So it's kind of there as a visual see that we're still here.
Yeah, and you see it's a process step by step, and you can upgrade. I mean, it goes a little bit, you want to try to be consistent, but on the other end, you also, in some cases, you need a bootstrap, and you just need to get started. And I think you're balancing this really well. Nigel, can we maybe get a photo of the door, the access door? Someone was asking of a photo to see the access to and placement of the toter. Maybe if you get, I don't know if you have one, if you can pull that up in the background. Just kind of, maybe we'll get that. And someone else was asking, since there's no cost for people to drop off their food scraps, or they actually said compost here, is this program making a profit? Domingo, how do you do that?
So this one of these sites is serving public housing, so our goal is not to make a profit from public housing residents. However, the site that we do have in Williamsburg, it's still free at the moment, but there's so many users that we're thinking of actually having people pay like $20 a month to use the smart bin at Williamsburg. So if you're in an area where it's like, we serve public housing. So public housing, we can't really charge those residents because we're supposed to be giving them something. So the benefit at public housing comes from, NYCHA workers having to clean up less food scraps from the ground, not having to spend so much money on pest control because we're removing the food from the system. So there's other ways that for public housing, this is beneficial cost-wise. But when it comes to like private places, like in Williamsburg, that place, you can actually charge people a small fee. And if you have 100 people using it and they're only paying, say, $5 a month, that tends to add up. And you can. I've had someone, before I was even allowing people to use it, some guy offered me $100. Like, hey, I'll give you $100 if you give me access to this bin. So I think you have to read the room where you are, the demand, and then as participation grows, you're either going to need more bins or you're going to have to figure something out. So I think there's definitely an algorithm in there to make this profitable for people who are using this in public places. But for public housing, I think we need to do like an environmental study to figure out like what the actual cost benefit is to installing something like this citywide.
It's worth bearing in mind, Domingo, that all this material is currently part of the trash stream. So it's costing certainly the city sanitation department are paying a lot of money to have that transported and disposed of. Finding a mechanism that says, hey, we reduced your trash bill, someone's trash bill, by this much. So therefore, we can put that into our composting facility, I think is probably the key. So that's sort of where we need to get to. Would you agree?
Yes, and there's also different aspects. There are some states now where we have organic waste mandates. So the city or the municipality actually has to do something about it. It's part of the whole solid waste as a whole, like you pointed out. And having drop-offs is, compared to a curbside, also more cost-effective, especially when you get started. So the biggest factor, really, cost factor, is the servicing of the bins. But if you compare that to actually driving a route, then that makes more sense. And in those places where we have private food waste haulers offering this as a service, it always comes out to that having a drop-off program is much more cost-effective than doing the pickup service with the buckets, which is a private service, and then you have those municipal services. It's really, again, about context.
There's a great question in there from Roger about an alternative sort of focus on suburban environments rather than sort of dense urban communities, and how do we determine the number of collection bins for suburban areas? It's a great question. I will hope to be coming back to this in another session where we involve a few municipalities that are working in different environments. But one thing I have found is that installing a drop-off for for around 100 properties, something like that, seems to work well. But the thing is, you don't have to put that many in straight away. You just start with one and you see how many people are using it, and then you start, you put in another one. You can scale it up as people start to use them, and you don't want people having to travel too far. I mean, would you put a bag of food waste, even if it was double bagged and that sort of thing, would you put it in your car and drive 10 minutes? Lots of people do, but lots of people probably won't. So try and get as close as we can to the actual communities that we're trying to serve, even in a suburban environment. Would be my thoughts on that, but we'll come back to that in another session.
Yeah, I see one more question I would like to answer, and it is about the educational part, and that's a really important point. What has been working are mailers, so postcards, which actually, if you start a drop-off program, that can be more expensive, is doing that in awareness campaign than the actual drop-off stations. So yeah, postcards work really well. Social media, talk to your local newspaper. You really need to consider all public relations channels that you have. And if you do a ribbon cutting ceremony, you should definitely invite all, city council, all the stakeholders, the deciders. The more people that have a high profile that you can get there, the better. Yeah. Someone was asking if there's a timeline for getting more metroSTOR bins at NYC housing campuses. Is there a timeline, or do you have something lined up?
Yeah. So we actually have we were awarded a USDA grant to put some of these up, but the funding is paused, so we're kind of waiting right now. So there's definitely a plan. The problem is funding. Like, we need funding for this, and public housing is being divested from right now. So it's right now, that's what we're gonna be meeting about all week, is trying to figure out the funding to get this done. But it's already a plan. Like NYCHA, I think Compost Power, Green City Force, a couple other CBOs made it into public housing's 10-year sustainability agenda, which is really cool. So this is something they signed up for. This is in their sustainability agenda, and I think the smart bins is something we started experimenting with when I got them. So it's something we're looking at. I think we also used metroSTOR bins at Wagner Houses for the actual just regular trash systems. So metroSTOR also does regular trash bins. So at Wagner Houses, they started off with the trash, paper, metal recycling, which is like directly across from that smart bin that you see in the public housing campus. And then after I showed them the smart bin, they're like, why didn't we put a smart bin there? We should have put the compost near the waste station. So I actually put that in the chat earlier, that NYCHA's actually thinking about building holistic waste stations that don't only have trash and metal, but they have trash, metal, paper, and composting to make it easier for residents when they come out their building. There's a one-stop shop for anything that comes out of their household.
Yeah, we have some more questions in the chat. Time is up, but if you guys want to keep answering questions, maybe we should just continue. Someone was asking for Nigel, when you talk to municipalities, do you see a difference in the reception of the food scrap collection idea for multifamily versus single family?
Yeah, interesting question. The multifamily, it is a lot more difficult because people, there's less ownership and accountability. It's a lot more challenging than single family homes. But we've found by using drop-offs, communicating clearly what we want people to do, making it easy, even in those environments, we've got comparable rates actually, about 35% diversion overall, to single family sort of curbside collection. So I think as long as you put the investment into the infrastructure and the communication, I think you can do it. We've proved you can do it.
Okay.
Domingo's proved you can do it.
Yeah. Someone else was asking for suburban county in Pennsylvania. They have a plan to place drop-off stations, but they need funding to set up secure site, lock containers, enclosures. Any ideas for funding? Yeah, it also says you were rejected for a grant. Definitely keep applying for grants. Right now, the grant climate is a little weird. So we expect that to hopefully normalize in a few months. There were a lot of grant programs that have been frozen. One of them is the Swiffer grant program. Definitely look into that. I hope it'll be unfrozen and continues. But then again, look into the SWACO program, because that is really a lot of a lot of rural areas. And setting up these drop-off stations it was like under $2,000 to do the enclosure, and then locked containers. It's like sometimes all they do is just toters with a padlock that has a number combination. So it doesn't need to be very expensive to get started. Yeah. Then someone was.
I think in Pennsylvania though, Tim, sorry,
Yeah.
in Pennsylvania, use a bear strap. If you're using just a toter, use a bear strap, because the bears are definitely going through trash bins.
Yeah, it's all about context, right? If you have bears nearby or large predators, you might not be able to bootstrap it as much as you could, in Ohio. But yeah, then I think you kind of already answered this question here. They were asking if you recommend to have a trash bin alongside the compost receptacles, so if someone has regular trash, if they could place it in there. And I think you made the point. Obviously, it makes sense to have it all in one place. Although, it's you want to make it clear that what is waste and what isn't, so that you won't be able to confuse the two. And another thing that I mentioned is you might have these existing places where you already drop off all the recyclables. Yeah, that would be a good place to place them alongside. Yeah, and someone else was asking what systems you use to actually compost all the waste. Domingo.
Yeah, it's we use 3-bin system, so that's literally just a wooden box with steel screen wrapped around it. We use a thermophilic method, so a 3-to-1 ratio. For every toter of food scraps, we have about 3 toters of carbon-rich material, which is a mix of wood chips and wood shavings that we get from woodworkers. When we mix this up really well, it gets up to about 145 degrees. And if we turn it every 7 days for about 6 weeks, we'll sustain that temperature, and then the compost is finished. At our Williamsburg site and some of our public housing campuses as well, we use windrows, and windrows are those large pyramids which do the same thing. You 3-to-1 ratio. You use your bulk amendment, which is wood chips and your wood shavings. You blend all that material up and you build it in a pyramid shape. But for windrows, to keep rats out, you have to cover it with about a 12-inch seal or biofilter of more mature material. I use the finished compost to do that seal because it has the most active microbes, and I try to keep those microbes that are breaking down the meat, dairy, bone, those enzymes. I don't want to lose any of that, so I put it back into my system. So we use the same process no matter where it is, the same recipe. It just like you sealing it more if it's an open vessel system like a windrow. A bin system is built to be rodent proof, so you don't have to worry about rats.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of other methods, in vessel composting, windrow. Again, it depends on your scale and your context. Someone asked Domingo, if you want to help them to assist setting stuff up in DC, maybe come visit them. Maybe that person, John Johnson, maybe you can provide your email or some sort of method of contact, and then Domingo can reach out to you directly, because they were also asking if you have like a training program or something like this that you could offer. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be cool. Give me your contact information and I'll
And
reach out.
someone else also asked if you could share your email, Domingo. You can reach Domingo also, I guess, through his website, compostpower.com, and he also has Instagram. And then while I'm saying all this, also make sure to check him out on Spotify, because he has a really cool song out there called Scraps. So make sure you all listen to his song. Let's see. Do we have more questions here? Someone was
Our
asking.
finished compost, or could I answer that one? I think someone asked what we do with the finished compost. So we try to give all of the finished compost to the farms. So Green City Forest is still a really big partner of ours, and they grow food for residents that they give to residents for free on campus. So we give our compost directly to those farms. If any residents who participate in the program, they can get compost as, like, if we have it, they can get it, right? If we don't have it, then they have to wait. But most of it goes out for free. Our Williamsburg site also gets this basically dispersed across community gardens in New York City, as well as New York City Public Housing Authority campuses. But we also give some finished compost to Domino Park in Brooklyn, because our landlords own Domino Park, and that's kind of the agreement we have to have this beautiful site on the river, is to give them some compost every now and then. So that works for us. Yeah. Hope that answers the question.
No, that's good.
Nigel,
I probably need to
Tiffany.
start. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah,
probably need to start wrapping up from my
We have
point of
another
view.
question for you, Nigel. How long does it take to set up the metroSTOR container once you have a location?
There's a few things obviously that you need to do in order to do that around resident engagement and your comms and whatnot. But purely from a nuts and bolts point of view, you can normally get one set up within a month or two.
A month or two. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out to Nigel, or you can also reach out to me. If your state has a U.S. Composting Council state chapter, feel free to reach out to them. And keep making compost mainstream.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks Domingo. Thanks Tim. Appreciate your help with this.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
I think there will be a recording, right? We'll send out the recording and the presentation to all who signed up.
We will in the next few days. Absolutely. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.